The next area is about Boethius, which is touching upon the idea of God's eternity and also divine foreknowledge. It's an issue which in the past students have often struggled with, but there's no real reason why, because it's fairly straightforward. It's also, if you are going to tackle the nature of God topic, any question that would come up, it's likely that you could use Boethius in some way. Now, Boethius, in about 500 AD, was imprisoned for different reasons, awaiting execution. And while he was waiting execution, he wrote a book which was called The Consolation of Philosophy. Now, the consolation, to console, is the idea of helping someone, comforting them. And the reason why he's used that title is because he's personified philosophy. He calls philosophy in the book Lady Philosophy. And what he's trying to do is sort out philosophy's problems, but he does it in a personification way by saying about consoling is going to help it. Now, the question that we're looking at in that book, and the problem, is to what extent can God justly, or to what extent can a Christian believe with integrity that God is just in punishing the wicked and rewarding the good? Now, you could think, well, this is just a problem of evil. But it's not just a problem of evil. It's not a problem of evil for one main reason. All theodicies have at the heart, or at the end, the afterlife. And they said, well, ultimately, God's justified because we're going to this better place. Well, what Boethius is saying is, well, is God righteous in doing that? Is he fair? Is he just? Or, because of divine foreknowledge, does this call into question his integrity? If God is aware of what is going to take place, then how can he be judge and jury? So, for instance, if I'm aware of what is going to take place, I am guilty of something. The example of this that I would have used in class is of one of the 9/11 bombers. Now, obviously, suicide bomber, so he's dead. But when they raided his house, they found some journals from his wife. And in it, they allude to the actions that he's going to carry out. There's no suggestion at all that she's involved in any way, but there is suggestions that she was aware of what he was going to do. Now, if this is the case, then she's also guilty of a crime because she didn't do anything to stop him. You know, inaction, in this case, is a crime. Now, get back to the question. Can God reward and punish justly? Well, the issue is all to do with his idea of omniscience, or what he calls divine foreknowledge, and linked to his notion of eternity. Now, the first thing to look at is that Boethius claims that God does not know what will happen. Now, this does not mean that we have limits on his omniscience, because God knows everything, but he doesn't know what will happen, because for Boethius, he says that God is atemporal, that God exists as a simultaneous present, and therefore his knowledge is phrased in a simultaneous moment. Now, what he says is, with knowledge and divine foreknowledge, that ultimately knowledge is focused on the knower. So the nature of the knowledge. So the nature of your knowledge, nature of my knowledge, nature of God's knowledge are all different. Effectively, it tells us about who is pertaining to know certain things. So God's knowledge is done in this timeless sense, in this simultaneous moment. He knows everything because ultimately everything to him is occurring simultaneously. Now, what Sir Michael Dummett says about this is that effectively the problems are with our language and our expression, because ultimately God exists in a timeless sense, and therefore we need a timeless tense, because the notions of what will happen, what has happened, don't apply to God. All that applies to God is what is happening, but what is happening is everything. So whereas temporal beings like ourselves, we have things in past, present and future, for God it doesn't happen like that. All that actually happens is linear. Now, getting back onto the notion of God having this different type of knowledge. Now, leading on to it, Boethius tries to use the example of the man on the hill walking to illustrate what he means by the simultaneous present and ultimately why God is justified. What he says is, imagine that you've got a man who's standing on a hill and there's a man who's walking down a path at the bottom of the hill. And the man who's walking down the path is not aware of the man who's watching. And it's a sunny day as well. So the sun is shining, and there's a man walking. Now, what he says here is, let's just pause it. You've got two different events which are necessary. It is necessary that the sun is shining. It's also necessary that the man is walking. But the two types of necessary actions are different. Now, for a start, the man who's observing the walking man is in no way impinging on his free will. The man is freely choosing to walk on the lane. But he can't escape the fact, at that moment in time, he is walking on the lane. The sun is also shining. Now, what we've got here is two types of necessity. We've got simple and conditional. Now, the sun has what we call conditional necessity. It's conditioned by its nature to shine. So, it can't do anything else. It must shine. The man walking, though, has simple necessity, which effectively equates to free will. He doesn't have to be walking, but he does have to be walking because he is walking. So for God, God is the man on the hill. He's not impacting on our freedom, but every action is necessary. And God is aware of every necessary action because it's happening right now. God can't intervene because to intervene would imply that there is a future. And God isn't impacting our freedom because we freely make the decision. But in that way, we could argue that it is predetermined. We know exactly what, or we don't know, but God knows exactly what is going to happen because it is happening. Now, the conclusion ultimately is that, therefore, we are fully responsible for our actions, and we cannot hold God accountable. Why can we not hold God accountable? Because we make our decisions. We have simple necessity. God is simply the man on the hill, knowing what is going to actually take place. We'll look at the criticism in the next paragraph.